Hello everybody, thank you for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to join you and learn a bit more about Rotary from the people I've been seated with and share a little bit about bats and the arts in Wellington. So to just touch on a few things, starting to reiterate about me, a little bit more information about me. As was mentioned, I'm the co-general manager of bats. I'm responsible for the business side of the organisation. We have a creative person who's in charge of programming the theatre and the shows that come in. I originally thought I might train as a lawyer, but then after a year of that ran away to the circus and decided to study design for film and theatre, which was a big degree that Massi and Toifikari used to offer. And after that spent some time managing small businesses and freelancing. Eventually I managed to join those two passions of business and the arts back together when I joined BATS 4 years ago. And I think this picture is apt. The title is actually entitled The Balancer. At the moment I'm finishing off the final year of my MBA. I'm looking after my beautiful daughter who's almost 20 months. I'm on 2 boards plus an advisory board. I regularly speak at conferences across Australia and New Zealand and try intermittently to write articles online. Specifically, my MBA researches into social enterprise and investment in social enterprise. So I was really excited to see the partnership between Rotary and the Arkina Foundation that you've just recently announced. It's really exciting and I congratulate you on taking that step. BATS is a lot older than people realise. It was founded in 1989, so we had our 25th anniversary last year. And it was founded by the 2 Simons, we affectionately refer to them as. And it was specifically to have a focus on developing new New Zealand work with a focus on accessibility. So it's really important for us that it's cheap and easy to put on a show and it's cheap and easy to come and see a show. So we operate a risk share policy where when a show comes to us, they can actually end up walking away owing us very little money after they've presented their work if they don't make money. So that enables them to take risks that they might not otherwise take. The building we've been in has an amazing history, and I'll talk in quite a bit of detail about our building today and how that's informed reinventing BATS over the last few years. It was built in 1924. It was originally for Manchester Unity, then had people like the Savage Club, Unity Theatre and the Royal Antediluvian Order of the Buffaloes. I don't know if you had any shared members with that organisation, but they used to live upstairs. They were our very benevolent landlords. And once told me a story that the reason they bought the building in the 70s was that nobody would rent them any buildings anymore because they got a reputation for getting drunk and burning them down. So to give you a sense of BATS, who we are, what we do, we partner with outside shows. So they come in and hire us as a venue, but we're much more than an empty room that you hire. We're a support structure, a network, a lot of built-in knowledge. We presented 68 shows last year, which had almost 400 performances, and we had almost 20,000 audience members. So across the course of a night, we might present up to 6 works in one building, which is quite a substantial number for what's quite a small organisation. And also these stats are even more impressive when you consider that we were actually closed for 1 month last year while we shifted between buildings. The key thing I want to talk about is the context of BATS, and the journey that we undertook, as I mentioned, has been really informed by the fact that we had the opportunity to completely redevelop our building. So in 2011, the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes put our building up for sale. BATS had the first right of refusal, and we undertook a really big exercise to work out whether we should buy it. But after working out that it would cost about $3 million just to do the basic job, and then we'd have this massive asset to look after ourselves, we decided it was a very bad idea for an organisation focused on risk to take on a big asset like that would actually make us much less likely to want to take risks. So we decided we either needed to find a generous benefactor or we would probably have to leave that site. The building itself needed a major overhaul. You could look at when they took some of the plaster off the walls, you could actually see where the workmen had stopped for lunch in the concrete pour, because this was in the very early days of concrete building in Wellington, and apparently they just used to go down to the beach, grab whatever gravel they could find and mix it up with whatever they had lying around and slap it up and hope that it did the job. So you probably can't see it, but that photo on the left, there are actually chunks of concrete that have fallen off the front of the building. That's how bad it was. And the right is a photo of what our lighting infrastructure used to look like. So we explored a lot of avenues of how we might solve that problem. One of the avenues was that we approached Sir Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh via letter and via a contact that we had, and very luckily for us, they agreed to purchase the building and undertake the renovation work, which for us was a huge weight off our mind because, as I said, we didn't want to be building owners. It's not what we do, it's not what we understand, it's not what we're good at. So we were very lucky that they agreed to undertake that work and to undertake the strengthening, but we also agreed to undertake a lot of the interior work that needed doing. So the theatres needed refitting, we needed new infrastructure for the lighting. There was a lot of complicated work that needed to be done inside as well. On top of that, we had to factor in the fact that we knew we would be out of the building for 12 months. So we undertook a really extensive search. We knew we'd be out for at least 12 months, probably longer. And theatres have very specific needs. It sounds obvious, but until you sit down and think about it, you need to be able to seat a certain number of people. You need a certain amount of power into the building. You need ways for those people to escape if there's a fire. So we scoured Wellington from top to bottom. I can put my hand on my heart, and I looked at every single commercial listing on Trade Me, no matter how ridiculous it looked. We visited over 30 sites and found that there was one site in Wellington that met our needs. It was ridiculously expensive to hire. But it was a disused bar on Cuba Street, and this was not a classy bar that we were taking over. It was very much one of those sort of student dives. They focused on selling cheap drinks, having foam parties. That was the sort of place it was prior to us, and I couldn't face the idea of making any of my staff clean it. We had to build and set up the entire space ourselves, but I got some students in from Student Job Search, and they spent 2 days cleaning the toilets alone. And they were very optimistic. They'd come out and go, "We finished!" And I'd go in and look around and go, "I'm really sorry, you haven't finished. You need to keep scrubbing." So we spent 6 weeks turning it from a very dirty bar into a reasonably passable theatre. And then spent 18 months in there battling the hot, the cold, the pigeons and the leaks. So that was another big learning experience. We undertook a really big fundraising exercise to do this. Over half our money came from Lotteries and Community Facilities Fund and the Wellington Regional Amenities Fund and Wellington City Council itself. So we are very thankful to them for their support in this project. The rest came from trusts, individuals, and some crowdfunding that we did. So we knew we had this great opportunity to review what BATS was and how we did it, and we knew that we were on the cusp of a really big technological change. We needed to look at buying new lighting equipment, new sound equipment, new seating blocks, and that made us step back and think, well, what is a theatre? How do we use it? And everything we did was focused around flexibility. Every decision I made in terms of that fit out was, how do we build a theatre that spans another 25 years? We didn't want to go in there and make decisions that in 3 or 5 years' time people turn around and went, well, why did they lock us down that one path? That would have been a real disaster, I think. So we launched our own website where people could buy items, which was a donation, and we decided to do it ourselves rather than use one of the crowdfunding platforms out there, because we had the skills in-house, both technically and marketing. And then we went through a really big construction phase. It did take longer than we all expected. It was more challenging. As anybody who's been involved in a building project, once you start cracking something open, it starts to look even worse than it did while it was all plastered over. So there was a point at which on the ground floor, this is a 3-story building at the front and 2 stories at the back, I could stand on the ground floor in a pit of mud and look directly up and see the sky. That was how extensive the renovation work was. We had new walls, new reinforcing, new structure all around, new roof. But the building itself needed a lot of that work. And again, through that process, we were focusing on the idea that we wanted to be flexible, welcoming, and modern, I think were the best ways to describe it. So this is where we started with the building that was falling apart. The architects came up with a really beautiful idea of what the building should look like that retained the character but rebuilt and redeveloped. We went through a pretty traumatic transition period of ripping the whole thing apart and hoping it would all come back together, and eventually ended up with a really incredibly beautiful and functional building that we're really, really proud of. Originally, BATS only had the ground floor, so we had one theatre, which was an 84-seat theatre, And that put a lot of constraints on the way we did things, how we thought about things. We were very much high turnover in that space, so we would do 3 shows a night in that one space. Now we've been able to open it up, so we've got a larger multi-purpose space above that one, and then a combined rehearsal space and performance room at the front as well, which can transition. And the idea of that is that BATS very much focuses on growing and developing new work, and this provides a transition spaces for people to go through. So in the rehearsal space, they can rehearse, they can perform, or they can perform to very small groups of people, say like a 40-seat theatre. Then they can move into one of our other 2 theatres, one which is reconfigurable and is a complete blank slate, and the other which is what you'd kind of expect as a normal end-on performance space with a fixed seating block and space for people to perform. They've now got dressing rooms, offices, green rooms, and a bar space. And as I say, all of this was thanks to that partnership that we built with the owners and their team. And I think it was a great model for other organisations and other not-for-profit organisations to look at how do we partner effectively with an outside organisation like that. It's never going to be easy. You know, we were spending some of the money, they were spending some of the money, and we were trying to work our way through to this joint vision that we had. But it becomes tricky at times when, you know, we passionately want something, but we know that it has big cost implications for the partner. So going through that process, I think, is an interesting model for other organisations, how you facilitate that process, how you meet those challenges, and how you learn to compromise based on, you know, the available resources. So for BATS, what's next now that we have this beautiful building? In 2015, we're going to be presenting a lot more shows. We obviously will be having a much larger audience. We'll be putting through more performers, designers, directors as part of that. But it's also a really great opportunity for us to learn about this new venue. We had a lot of expectations of how it might work, but as anybody who's moved into even just a new house, once you get in there, you learn that actually things work differently, and some of the things you thought worked great actually don't work the way you thought they did, and some of the things you didn't even think about are actually huge opportunities. So we're now looking to build sustainable funding for the long term. I think with my Arts Wellington hat on, it's a really interesting environment that the arts is in. A lot of people advocate for a lot more funding in the arts. I'm not specifically one of those people because, for example, government funding is a huge strategic risk for arts organisations, as has been shown time again in places like the UK and Australia, where large funding cuts have just led to the death of arts organisations who haven't learnt to support themselves. But I think, you know, organisations like Rotary, who support the arts, and other trusts and funds that support the arts, do incredible work to help diversify that risk for arts organisations. This was a 3-year project, and naturally I'm reasonably proud of the outcome. So to finish, what I'm going to do is run a little slideshow of images, and I'm happy to answer any questions people might have about BATS or as an organisation. I think I've probably got a minute or 2 left in which to do that. 5 minutes? Perfect. Yeah. Just curious if anyone...
Chris was talking about the difference between Circa and BATS, and I thought for us looking around being a relatively conservative audience, it's a good metaphor. Go for it. Okay.
So I was asked by Bruce, how would you compare and contrast Circa and BATS? And the first point is to make is that actually we have a lot of shared audience with somewhere like Circa, same with the Hannah Playhouse and other organisations around. We don't see other theatres as competitors, we often work quite closely together. The metaphor I used is that you could think of Circa as an ocean cruise liner. Probably is the best. You know, if you go on a cruise, you know roughly what you're getting. You know, they've kind of got a well-structured package. You know you can go to dinner in the restaurant. You know you can experience what is reasonably predictable. You're on a reasonably known path ahead of time. Whereas if you come to BATS, it's a bit more like motorbiking through Vietnam. It's going to be uncomfortable at times, but it's probably going to be quite exciting, and you just don't quite know what's around the next corner. So. Got any questions about that? That's a great question. I don't know the total cost. luckily. Because otherwise, because you're not the first person to have asked that question. I know that the owners invested a significant amount of money. I don't know what that sum is. I know that we are humbled by what we think it might be, because that's an incredible investment to make in bats. We, on our side, raised $650,000, and we spent pretty much all of that on our renovations. But unfortunately, I don't know. Forever's a long time, and bats will be around for a long time. If you looked at our lease, you would not consider it to be a market rent. It's probably the best way to describe that. It is the rent of a benevolent landlord. Do you want to pick? Yeah. So the core staff we employ are the staff at the building. The shows themselves employ their own staff. So each show is essentially its own little capsule. So they come to us and say, we want to put on, this brand new show that's been written by this writer, and they crew the shows themselves. So we don't keep any actors or star or any crew on ourselves. We just have our own staff. I think it depends a lot at what level you talk about. So we have an incredible board, and have had an incredible board. Our previous board chair stood down once we finished the building project, which was Victoria Speckman of Gibson Group. She's an incredible business person and an incredible leader. So at board level, there was never any challenge at all with business understanding. We have a really broad mix of people from government, business, and the arts on that board. At staff level, I think everybody's money is often a dirty word in the arts. Nobody wants to talk about it, especially the people who are at the most creative end, and that gets them into trouble quite often. They're similar to starting any kind of company. Nobody wants to talk about who's going to get how much. So I think it happens more out in the industry, away from us, with the shows themselves. I think people sometimes struggle to understand our model. Especially the shows, and they kind of go, well, what are we paying for? What are we getting for that money? So that's often where I'm most challenging. And nobody understands GST. That's the biggest problem for me. Yeah.
It's a particularly relevant comment for Jeff Baskin, may I say. One last question. Tuku, I think, had his hand up for a while.
Globally, audiences around the world are declining for live performance, and that's for a number of reasons. It's easy to point fingers and blame, but ultimately it's because we, as an industry, aren't articulating our value well enough. Because if people saw value in what we were doing and the prices that we were charging, they would be coming. So that's our major problem. Within Wellington, we see overall, across New Zealand, we're seeing declining live performance audiences. Within Wellington, BATS itself, we've seen reasonably strong performance since we moved back into the building and while we were off-site. We don't yet know what proportion of that comes from the novelty of our new building. Is it just people who are coming to see shows because they want to see the new BATS, or are we genuinely delivering something that people want to see? So the summary is essentially declining worldwide and in New Zealand.